Thanks for joining me for Scott Pop. I'm your host, Alan Glenn. In this episode, I'm going to be reviewing 3 books. These are A Leap into the Void by Douglas MacIntyre, Stay Alive by Scott Rowley, the story of Stuart Adamson, and the third one is Caledonia Screaming by Grant McPhee. If you're unaware of Grant's work, I'd suggest looking at Big Gold Dream. It's a documentary, it's really good. It's about postcard records and fast label in Edinburgh. It looks at the bands, the people involved, and there's a great performance from Davy Henderson. Davy's a bit of a star around these parts, so this is probably as good a time as any to drop in a little clip of him talking about what inspired him to start the fire engines.
Scottish music was gigantic in my house because literally my next door neighbours were the guys in Bilbo Baggins who were managed by Tam Payton. Brian Spence, the Spences were I lived at number 26 Clarmiston View and they lived at number 28. Gordon McIntosh lived round the corner. He was the guitar player who sadly passed. He was like 5 doors away. Jimmy Devlin, who was the bass player, stayed across the park. And their roadie, Billy O'Rourke, it was Jimmy O'Rourke who played for Hibs. His brother, they stayed round the corner. John O'Rourke. It was really close. I mean, that influence of people like Brian Spence and Gordon McIntosh being in bands, they were in bands when they were like 14 years old. My brother had kind of done stuff with them. I remember going up into a talent contest at the Ross Bandstand with these older teenagers. I was like 6 years old at the time, and they sang Sorrow on the Ross Bandstand. Brian Spence, my big brother, and Gordon McIntosh was there, Malky McGregor. So that sort of excitement about performing or being in a band, that was the thing, you know. That's where it sort of came from. And then oh God, what age was I? I don't know, about 12 or 13. Your next door neighbours were actually on the telly. That was a big thing then, on Lift Off with Aisha. Tam Payton used to draw up in his like sort of Stutzbear cat or whatever it was, big, massive American wooden-sided, God knows what it was, like sort of Beach Boys surf estate mobile. And he was on the street. The Bay City Rollers had a house in Clarmiston where we all grew up. So the actual fact, I mean, that was such a big thing that you're people that you literally saw every day were appearing on pop shows like Lift Off with Aisha and what was the other one?
Quite inspiring then? Was that
Oh, it was unbelievable. It was mad. I mean, can you imagine what people didn't get on the telly then that you knew? There was hardly any Scottish people on the telly. The only Scottish people was Fife Robertson doing the Lawson Sausages advert and Billy Connolly and the Alex Harvey band. You know what I mean? Which were very sensational Alex Harvey. But, you know, it was unbelievable to think. And also they were about to do Top of the Pops, and the only reason they never done Top of the Pops because there was, unluckily for them, there was an electrician strike that week.
Who's that, Bilbo Baggins?
Aye, yeah. That's the way I remember it anyway, yeah, and they were meant to be appearing. But they were, I mean, your neighbour, I mean, that was thrilling. I used to hear the van coming back at 3 o'clock in the morning, pulling upside the house, and it was like, where have they been the night? And it was covered in nail varnish. Girls had written all over, and boys probably. It was just, and they used to have fans coming up from all over Britain and coming up and sort of hanging outside your next door neighbour's house. I mean, that was insane.
What I like about Big Gold Dream and Grant's work in his new book is that he often talks to people whose voices go unheard of in the mainstream media. In the book there's a great story about a fan in Falkirk, a Stranglers fan, who doesn't have any pictures of her time dressed as punks because the local boots actually censored the negatives. It's a really, really good book and it's well worth a read. It's clear from Caledonia Screaming that people in Scotland, particularly young people, were desperate for a movement to inspire them, and that's exactly what happened with punk. Here's Grant talking about the musical landscape, or the lack of it, in the run-up to punk explosion in Scotland in 1976.
There really wasn't a musical landscape in Scotland. It's fascinating, really. The infrastructure just wasn't there, although we had, lots of fantastic, musicians and bands. It's that cliche, you had to go to London really to make it. And in Manchester, I'm a strong believer that punk scene and the sort of subsequent DIY independent scene was really due to a lot to like Strawberry Studios and the infrastructure they'd built with like 10cc. And I think Scotland really almost was onto the verge of that. Alex Harvey, who is, as you know, was a fantastic musician and you're one of the most important creatives to come from Scotland. But my interest for the Caledonia Screaming book was his manager Bill Fahili, who was Nazareth's manager as well. His background was in, I believe, bingo halls in Aberdeen, and he wanted to move into music management, and he luckily encountered Nazareth and had hits with them, and that led to him with his management company and his promotions company Mountain moving into forming an independent record label. And this was, I believe, 74, certainly in 75 and into 76. And, tragically, he was like killed in, it was July 1976. It's almost like sort of like a tragic harbinger of like what would happen like with punk. And, I have a feeling that, he would have like continued with Mountain and, would have started to build infrastructure within Scotland. He certainly was defiantly based in Scotland, one of the few people who did that. And it's one of the great, what ifs. He's absolutely at the top of his game.
Was that plane disaster or something? I remember reading.
Plane crash outside Moffat. He'd been. I looked into the crash reports for it, and it was just a tragic accident. It was just outside like Moffat on his way back from some business work in London and or possibly Ireland, but certainly coming back to Scotland with his family, with his son. It's a real tragedy, and he was such a unique character in music, unlike Andrew Oldham with like Immediate or any of those impresarios. He was very much in the background, and I think
was he that? Do you think he was that influential at that time? Then do you think with Alex Harvey, without Feely and Alex Harvey, the music scene might have been the Bay City Rollers, which are not a bad band, but they're not really going towards that kind of punk explosion, are they?
But they're also a fascinating band, and again, it's their management, and we have to be very careful how we sort of like treat Dan Payton and how we sort of like discuss him, because he was like an abhorrent person, and there's some like horrific stories that have come out which weren't known to the public at the time. And there's that cliche, and it's almost like a joke that Malcolm McLaren wanted the Sex Pistols to be like the Bay City Rollers, and it's certainly been dismissed, but I think there's actually a lot of truth in that.
Another important Scottish figure who started making a name for himself when punk seeped into post-punk is Douglas McIntyre, who's played in bands such as Love Money, The Bathers, The Jazzeteers, and he's played with Lloyd Cole. He's also the boss of Creeping Bent Records, and his new book, A Leap into the Void, has just been published by Last Night from Glasgow. As he recounts in his book, Douglas's musical journey started back in 1981, when he was playing with a band called Article 58. Here he is talking about being in the studio with Malcolm Ross from Joseph K at the time and Alan Horn from Postcard Records while they were making the first single, Event to Come.
We'd done a demo and we sent a tape to like a few labels like Zoo Records, Factory, Fast Product, Rough Trade, Postcard, and Postcard got back saying, indicating that Malcolm Ross would be keen to come into the studio and help us record, and we were massive Joseph K fans, so that was great. And Malcolm was so generous with his time, and we were really excited to be working with him. And I think once we'd done that recording, Malcolm then played it to Alan Campbell, who was obviously Joseph K's manager, as you mentioned, and Alan asked if we wanted to release it as a single, which we did.
And I think Alan Horn was involved as well. I remember reading somewhere as it was Alan Horn was involved with the not Alan, so much the recording, but the kind of ideas behind the kind of single, I suppose. But
Alan
which is very Alan Horn, obviously.
Well, Alan Horn came out we recorded the track in Straven. There was a studio in Straven where the first Orange Juice single was recorded, Falling and Laughing. So Alan came out with Malcolm and definitely contributed to the process.
Mm-hmm. And what kind of influence did he have then? Because he was always seen as this kind of enigmatic figure, but nobody quite knew exactly what he was doing. But was he quite helpful? Was he quite generous with his time again, like Malcolm, or was he slightly more in the background?
It was very kind of him to offer to come out to Straven. So we were very, very lucky, and that was a very generous thing to do. I mean, in the studio, Alan Horn's not a musician, so. But you don't need to be a musician to produce a record. It's more about ideas, and he did have he did contribute a lot of ideas. It was predominantly Malcolm, because we're a guitar band, and we were influenced by Joseph K, so we're in the same ballpark. So Malcolm was really helpful and kind of guided us through the whole process of trying to make a record.
A Leap Into the Void is a great read for anyone looking to find out more about the Scottish music industry and about the figures and characters involved in it. It's packed with a cast of great Scottish music characters, not surprisingly from someone who seems to be friends with everyone in the Scottish music business, and whose wife is Katie Leroney, the singer of Secret Goldfish, whose in-laws are Claire Grogan from Outward Images and Stephen Leroney, and whose daughter also plays in the band. It's a really, really good book, and I recommend it. A Leap Into the Void crams 30 years of musical activity into just 108 pages, from the launch of the label in 1994 at the Tramway in Glasgow, up to the last release of the label, appropriately enough, the Article 58 album Echoes, Thrash and Harmony, which was originally recorded back in 1981. It's well worth a read. 1981 was also a pivotal year for Stuart Adamson, subject of a new book, Stay Alive, on the Skids and Big Country legend. It's written by Scott Rowley, who was the editor-in-chief of Classic Rock for over a decade. While most people watching this podcast will know about Stuart and his history, some people may just be joining, so we'll give a quick reminder of his life pre-Big Country. Stuart was born in Manchester in 1958 to parents William and Anne. He then moved with his family to Crossgates, a small mining village just outside Dunfermline. He attended Beath High School, where his contemporaries included Sir Ian Rankin.
I was at Beath High School, Cowdenbeath. Stuart Adamson was 2 years above me. I remember the Skids first single being released. I think with the help of a electrical shop in the High Street in Cowdenbeath.
Of course.
I think the owner might have put the money up for it.
Yeah, I think it was Sandy Muir.
Muir's.
As I mentioned earlier, 1981 was a pivotal year because they then, up until 1980, the Skids became big quite quickly. 3 albums, the third album in 1980, possibly their best, The Absolute Game, had several hit singles, including Women in Winter and Circus Games. But the problem with the Skids was clearly the relationship between Stuart Adamson and Richard Jobson. Stuart had a reputation for walking out of the band, and in 1981 he walked out for the last time. He was interested in starting a new band, and he came across a band called Eurosect, a post-punk outfit whose guitarist was Bruce Watson. I was actually on bass, and the drummer was Deke Call. Stuart was aware of the band, and he was particularly taken with one track when him and Bruce started Big Country in 1981. It was the track they worked on. Here we can get a little taste of it. This is the song called Forbidden Whispers. Scott Rowley reminds us, after a few bumpy starts, Big Country again got success very quickly. The catalyst, I think, was undoubtedly Steve Lillywhite. His production and his attitude towards the band, he was clearly a fan, which I think always helps. He was clearly a fan of the band, and he decided to try this new sound, and he recorded different ways with the drums, etc. But Big Country in the 80s were unfairly categorised as this kind of bagpipe guitars and check shirts outfit, and they were much more than that, and the book is much more than a book about music. Two of the more shocking segments of the book address the brutality of alcoholism and the music business. Reading the section on the EMI when they signed a deal with EMI, which they basically gave away all their rights to the music, it reminds me of that great Hunter S. Thompson quote, which describes the music business as a cruel and shallow money trench, a long plastic hallway where pimps and thieves run free and good men die like dogs. There's also a negative side. It's fair to say in the latter stages of the story, alcohol plays a huge part. One of the most difficult parts to read is the account from Callum, where he's trying to find his dad in Nashville, and he's going in and out bars. By September 2001, Stuart had really hit rock bottom. In one part of the book, there's an episode where he goes missing in the UK, and he's found in Gatwick. He's in such a bad state that he's taken to hospital. Just a few months later, on December the 16th, 2001, Stuart was found hanged in a hotel in Hawaii. While the book is very good at the context and putting Stuart into context, it does skip slightly over the main issues they faced when signed to a major label. Indeed, there's only one direct quote from Dave Bates, who I believe is integral to the story, and the only direct quote is actually lifted from my own book, Stuart Adamson in a Big Country, but it's a minor quibble on a book that puts Stuart into a lot of context, thanks undoubtedly to the contributions of Stuart's wives, Melanie, Shelley and Sandra, and his children, Callum and Kirsten. Their frank, unflinching accounts are often quite difficult to read, but it won't make this book what it really is. That's it for this episode of Scott Pop. I hope you enjoyed it. The interview with Grant McPhee will be up shortly. Douglas McIntyre is a guest on the show next week, and I did ask Scott Rowley to come on the show to discuss his book, but he declined. Thanks for listening. Please follow and subscribe, and I'll be back next week. Thank you.